Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome. Avid Learning, in association with the NGMA Mumbai, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, presents The Art of the Sitar, a lecture demonstration on the virtuosity of the sitar, its legacy, and its importance as an instrument. Many of you all in the audience know us as Avid and have been regulars at our workshops, so you realize that performing arts is a vertical or something we really believe in and are very passionate about. In fact, in 2009, when Avid started, our first program was appreciating and understanding Western classical music with Zain Dalal. Ever since, we've covered jazz, we've covered Indian classical music, we've done workshops on the sarod, many book launches around music, and finally today we talk about the sitar. So we're very excited. This program is in continuation with Avid's collaboration with the NGMA, and I'd like to thank Mr. Kenneth and Shruti for making this happen. I don't know if they're around and if they want to say a few words at some point, but I guess they'll show up. Tonight, the prolific musician and sitarist Hidayat Husain Khan will give us an exclusive performance and also be in conversation with author and journalist Namita Devidayal, who has just finished a biography on Hidayat's father, Ustad Vilayat Khan, which will be published later this year. The descendant and proponent of one of the most treasured lineages of Indian classical music, Hidayat harbors a rare creative brilliance that takes him across all genres and nuances of music. Hidayat's adeptness is as evident as his intricately plays the sitar from the classical gharana style and has successfully worked on adaptations of the sitar sounds in Western popular music. Namita Devidayal is the author of two books, The Music Room and Aftertaste. She's a journalist with the Times of India and also a trained Indian classical singer and one of the curators of the Times of India Festival, Literature Festival. Now, this is the point of time when I tell you to take out your phones and put them on silent, but in this room, everyone is not getting a signal, I assume. So just bring them out and take pictures. And after you leave, I'm going to encourage you to post, repost, tag. Our handle is @AvidLearning and our hashtag is Learning Never Stops. So now I'm going to welcome Hidayat, who's going to perform first a few songs, and then he's going to be joined by Namita. Please. And look forward to a very lyrical evening. Thank you.
as much as I would love to play, and this is such a historic venue that so many of my heroes and great musicians have performed. But today is a conversation about music, and I thank so much Avid and Asad and all the people that have made this possible to give Anutosh Bhai, myself and Namita an opportunity to come and talk about music and just spend an evening with all of you all. So thank you all so much for coming, and at this point we'd like to welcome Namita Ji. And
I've spent the last 3 years living in this world, even as a sort of outsider, but very much within it, because Hidayat basically about 3 or 4 years ago asked me to consider consider writing a book about Ustad Hidayat Khan, and it's really been one of the most rewarding experiences for me, because it's taken me into this world. And this particular rag that Hidayat just played, Sanj Saravali, was created by Vilayat Khan, and I basically just listened to it non-stop for the last 3 years, so I'm just getting quite in the mood, as it were. So what I thought I'd do is, Hidayat spent a lot of time with me sharing things about the way in which his father would sort of talk about music. And as you all know, when it comes to music, there's so much more to learning it than the actual notes and the actual sort of playing of it. It's all the sort of backstories of understanding life, and I think Vilayat Khan is really an example of that, because he pretty much lived his every moment of his life in a manner that got reflected in some way in his music. And I think a lot of musicians, I would say, have that, when they reach a certain point, that sort of thing does come into their music. So I have picked a little bit to read from this book, where Hidayat had spoken to me about this time when his father talked to him about the music, and I'm going to read out from it and then have Hidayat take it further. It was while father and son were on a concert tour in Oregon in 1997 that Hidayat felt a small shift take place in his music, and his father heard it too. They had just played together on stage. Because of the angle at which he was sitting, Hidayat had been able to closely observe his father's right hand modulations and saw how he extracted so many different tonal textures from the instrument. That night, when he was back in the hotel room and his father was in the shower, he pulled out Vilayat Khan's sitar and started playing, paying attention to those minute differences in tone. Vilayat Khan emerged from the bathroom and had a look of utter joy on his face. He knew his son had seen the music. Those years of berating and arguing and persisting had paid off. His towel still wrapped around him, he sat on the bed and started talking in Urdu with that quiet enthusiasm that comes when you have finally found a discerning audience. This is him speaking. There used to be this Persian carpet in our house. If you brushed the carpet one way, it looked exactly the same. But if you brushed it the other way, you could see a slight difference towards the very end. It was so subtle that you may not even notice Bebu. He used to call him Bebu.
The secret's out.
You had to look carefully to tell the difference. Hidayat put his sitar down and sat cross-legged, resting his chin on his knuckles, listening intently. Bebu, the carpet was created by a master weaver, but he died midway, and the last bit was finished by his son. Obviously, the way the two men held the thread must have been slightly different. But that minute difference is what you need to get into your music. Pay attention to that level of detail. If you have that kind of eye and vision, then people may not consciously realize what you are doing, but on a subconscious level, it will transport them and grip them. Vilayat Khan reached into his suitcase and pulled out a deep red Kashmiri Jamewar shawl covered with paisleys and opened it. Look at these patterns, Bebu. If you go close, each one looks so intricate. And when you look at it from afar, it is a totally different experience. The same with a Rembrandt painting. Blurry up close, but when you move away, it all comes together. You have to put that into your music. In the pattern of a taan, the difference between the first phrase, the second phrase, and the third phrase is so minute that until you complete the entire taan, you don't see the full picture. Suddenly, when the taan is coming to an end, the full picture emerges and it feels so defined, so complete. Vilayat Khan got up, kissed his son on the cheek, and then proceeded to turn on the television where a World Wrestling Federation game was in full swing, and he watched it till the end of the fight. So, I guess if Hidayat could talk a little bit about this idea of seeing music, because it really is something that defines Vilayat Khan Sahab and their particular kind of music. And I'm still trying to get a grip on what exactly it means, because it's just such an abstract idea, the idea that you see music, you visualize music. So if Hidayat could talk a little bit about that and the elephants, and maybe even describe and demonstrate it on the instrument, I think it'll be quite special.
So we've had so many such moments of interactions that. So growing up in a musical family, it's not about the taaleem, the training that you get. Sina basina taaleem, which is basically sitting in front of your guru and learning a composition or a rag and stuff. It's the subliminal messaging and the conversations that they have, the things that they appreciate in music and what they like. That is really what plays the integral part, and that's what I think the Gurukul system promotes, which our music thrives on. And unfortunately, in the universities and stuff like that, you can learn the music, but you really can't learn the essence of music. So born into a family of musicians, I mean, I feel very privileged to have grown around the legends who were not legends, they were just my chachas and kakas or cool uncles, you know. Really, they were, and one thing great, one thing that's common between great musicians across the globe is when you sit with them and you talk to them, they're just awesome people to be around with, and they're fun people because they do not take their life or their music seriously all the time, and music is actually a part of their life. It's not that they're putting on an act or they're doing it at a certain time. So when music becomes a part of your life, it's just you. And that was a unique experience. So I've been fortunate enough to have many such moments where so much information was passed down without me realizing what I was actually inheriting. So Gaiki Ang, which my father is credited for, and that we all sort of follow, we're copying vocal style of music, or we're emulating the vocal style of music. But it's much more in a subtle sense, because our music is very, very subtle. It's not meant for the masses. We're not supposed to play for 5,000 people. We're supposed to play for a select crowd like this, because we're talking about such subtleties and details that only the select few sort of understand. And the visual part of it is, my father would always tell me that imagine your phrase, visualize it, give it a picture, and then play it. And I swear to you, I still don't get it. I mean, but conceptually, I mean, It's a conversation. He said, don't get up on stage and do a lecture. He said, get up on stage and have a conversation. And what that means is it depends on who you are over here. So you're as much a part of this as much as I am, or all of us over here. Depending on what energy sort of you spill in this room, we sort of get to have a feedback and we respond back in that way. So somebody who prepares a lecture can talk about whatever and be amazing at it and have done a lot of research, but regardless of what's going on in anyone's life, they will talk about that lecture. But somebody who has a conversation will start a conversation with a typical something like, hello, you know, how are you, how was your day? And then take it from there. I mean, it could be a frivolous conversation or it could be a very meaningful conversation. So apart from just following a vocal style of music, it was also visualizing phrases. So I'm going to try and give you an example. I don't know how much it'll make sense, but I'll try. So Namita and I were discussing this yesterday, and it's like, it's very abstract. I mean, it doesn't have to translate into 2 + 2 4. I mean, 2 + 2 becomes 10 when it comes to music, or even 9.5 or whatever. But as I said, it's like hello and how are you, you know? So how would you say hello in music? You won't be like... absolutely have to mean just by the melody that you're playing. It can be textural also. So it can be... Or... Are you being condescending? Are you being real? Are you just asking for the sake of asking? You know, because we have to say hi when we see each other. So music should be a language of communication, and that's how we sort of learned from the beginning. I mean, my father would sit there and say, I don't remember getting talim from him where he said, okay, this is what you need to learn and master it. No, he said, this is an idea, now run with it. So from day one, honestly, he would come into the room and he'd say, okay, this is an idea, now see where you can take it. So it's not about just one word, it's about your creativity of finding your own space and in the world, you know, and having a conversation.
I have to read out one bit because this is very funny. So it's not been all fun and games, clearly. I think Hidayat was largely tortured for the better part of his life. And this bit describes that, but the reason I want to read it out is because I want Hidayat to then demonstrate what this torture did to his instrument and to him. So this is when Hidayat was much younger, and all he wanted to do was party. And
little has changed.
I'm so relieved to hear that. But his father always thought otherwise and made no bones about it. It led to many very lovely, ferocious moments. But this one is less ferocious, but it's telling. One evening in the mid-1990s, Vilayat Khan was teaching a very reluctant Hidayat Rag Purya. Abba, can I please go out and meet my friends? We already made the plan. You cannot go. He said it quietly, without looking up, sitting on the bed, playing solitaire with his old deck of cards. Hidayat sat on the ground in front of him, seething, playing the sitar, thinking only about what he would rather be doing instead. Just keep developing that part between ni and ga, he said. He demonstrated some movements and then asked Hidayat to do it on his own. He did not comment. Hidayat did not dare show his irritation. He continued playing, finding different ways to tackle those 4 notes. About half an hour into this, without looking up from his cards, Vilayat Khan said, "If you are bored, be bored, but don't get up." At this point, Hidayat was ready to kill his father, but he continued to play the sitar. And then we move into what Hidayat tells me many years later. "I now realize what he was teaching me almost 30 years later," says Hidayat. "If you're given such a small space to work in, basically 4 notes, you learn to be innovative within the boundaries. You are bored out of your mind, so to fight the boredom, you gradually start finding different mathematical movements. You find another movement, and then another. And then, when you're bored of the melodic movement, you start exploring a change in the tone or in the texture, or how much weight to put on the notes. And after you have done all this, it starts making sense, and you realize that you have all this stuff to choose from when you actually perform. It all makes sense now." So, I wonder if you can actually show us how you do that, how you move from just sort of within those 4 notes, or how many ever notes you decide to pick, moving from melodic into tonality, into adding texture, into adding a percussive element within that limited sphere.
Absolutely. So we'll stick with Yaman. Those of you who have learned in classical music know this very popular palta, which is an exercise that people do in Yaman. Which so, first, it's like what we were talking about, what I was saying earlier, that this is an idea. This is not something that you just do, So music is all about imagination, and your music is only as good as your imagination is. So what can you find within this very age-old palta that everyone, all of us have, who's learned any music, has practiced this, right? So first you take 4 parts, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Now you can always reverse the order, or whatever way the order can change. It could be like 2, 1, 3, 4. Or double up on certain movements, or 3, 2, 1, 4, or whichever way. So basically finding places to innovate within a certain spectrum. I had a lecture in New York at Parsons School of Design, and when the professor sort of called me to give a lecture, I was like, what am I going to talk to these guys about? I said, just talk to them about whatever you want to talk to them about. So I wanted to sort of talk to them about creativity, because that's what we learned from day one. And one of the things that I told them, that creativity comes from 2 avenues. One is out of necessity, the other is out of pure innovation. And so I asked them, I said, what do you do with a bottle of water? In the US, you buy a bottle of water, you drink it. If you're conscientious, then you sort of recycle it. Otherwise, that's about it. If you're from an Indian background, then you will at least reuse it once more. Because we didn't grow up with these things, right? So we have, but then comes the next step. I mean, I've seen water bottles being used as flotation devices, as funnels, as walls, as decorations. And if you tell an American that we took this simple bottle of water and did so many things with it, they can't imagine it. Because they didn't need to imagine it. We needed to imagine. We needed to make things out of it. And that's the same way music goes. So talking about those 4 movements. So if I just give you a very small example of just... Right. idea is that when you have so many ideas in your head, but they're in a subconscious level, so you pick and choose them as the conversation requires you to do it. And within a discipline comes that creativity. And I think that is one of the fundamentals of our music. And I've had many very painful moments learning that.
It all pays off, right? So the most differentiating thing about, among many others, about Vilayat Khan Sahib and this Gharana's music is that, and it's something that happened quite accidentally, and it's really strange how destiny works. So to give you a little background, Vilayat Khan Sahib lost his father at a very young age, and then had to sort of go and find mentors wherever he could. So he sort of really bhatkoed around and learned from a range of teachers, which really ranged from gramophone records to long lost relatives to just sitting in the radio station, which had just started in those days, and listening to the great masters repeatedly. Now, one of the most key mentors in his life after his father went was his Mamu and his Nana on his maternal side. And these people were also hereditary musicians like him, but they were singers. And so he basically learnt singing. And he actually became a very remarkable singer, a vocal musician for the better part of his teenage years, because that's what he had access to. And there came a point where he would actually give full vocal performances, and the sitar was like there, but he would sort of like, I think the singing took precedence. At some point, his mum sat him down and said, "Beta, this is all very well, but you know, you come from a lineage of sitar players, and I come from a lineage of singers, but I will never have anyone tell me that, hey, you basically made your son into, you know, your side of the family. You have to basically take on the paternal side. So do whatever it takes, but you're going to stop singing and play the sitar." And what happened as a result was that he made the sitar sing. So this was the first time that anyone used the instrument in a manner in which it actually replicated all the elements of vocal music, which means right from the emotion to the actual mean swar to all the things that Hidayat's about to show us. So wouldn't you say that's kind of accurate? Like basically, I want you to talk about this and show us how this gaiki ang comes into sitar and differentiates it from that time on. This idea that your sitar is actually singing.
Sure. Absolutely.
I think it'll be more interesting than me attempting to talk about it.
Today the tag is the art of the sitar, and we're spending time talking about Ustad Vilayat Khan, which is very interesting because that is the art of there was an interview of Pandit Budhet Mukherjee that I was hearing on YouTube recently, and he talks about how Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahib, my great-grandfather, invented the stroke Ra, which is very simple, which is just the outward stroke. It's like somebody invented chappals, you know, or light bulb, or electricity, or whatever. We take it for granted, I mean, but we don't realize that without the light bulb, or without having slippers, or whatever, I mean, we wouldn't have had a foundation to do the amazing things that we do today. So Ustad Vilayat Khan has been one of those people in the most recent times that has completely changed the dynamics of instrumental music. In all traditions, vocal music has always been the epitome of music, and instrumental music is sort of trying to get up there. But with the innovations that were made to the sitar, structural, tonal, musical innovations that were made to the sitar, that sitar has become such a versatile and amazing instrument that it's capable of so much more. We can do vocal music, we can do instrumental music, we can do living abroad, working with Western musicians and everything. We can do riffs, we can do harmonies. Just the one thing that, I mean, the Gandhar Pancham sitar, which is basically a harmony sitar, you know, which is not a part of our music. Our music was very linear, it wasn't harmony based. And now we have this, we have the Vadi Samvadi of the Sur, of the Rag that's open, and we get chord patterns out of the sitar where you hear people, things like multiple things. I mean, be it Western music or tabla or Indian music and everything. But the unique thing about him was that he sort of took all these influences and he converted them into, and he understood them. He didn't copy them. He understood them and he got inspired by them, and he created patterns and movements that worked for Indian music, that worked for the sitar, that don't feel unnatural. That have a natural way of progression. So yes, so we see Gaikiyang in the alap and the phrasing we've spoken about, some Tan patterns also which follow the Gamakan, but also rhythm riffs that you call, that you play in guitars and stuff, that you sort of use like the whole sort of tonality and the percussive, there was bits of like piano, gaiki, everything kind of comes into it. Absolutely.
It's quite amazing because I don't think this was done prior to him.
Oh, not at all. But now this is the standard, right?
Yes, it's become the...
As a standard. Now, sort of, so within these phrases, I took influences from the tabla, I took influences from the Western music of playing riffs and guitars, and even Sufi music, right? Typical Sufi movement. versatility sort of came into, has become the sitar actually. And we have an opportunity to sort of take it from a very serious to a very fun to play concerts with rock music and jazz music and Indian classical and South Indian music and everything. And it's just amazing that sitar has been developed to a point where I've never felt as a musician limited by the capacity of my instrument. I felt limited by the capacity of my brain, but not as my
So I have a question over here, which is that in fact you told me this amazing story about well, this is going to be about classical music and fusion and contemporary music, because I know you do both. So when you all had moved to the States and there was a concert in, I can't remember, Carnegie Hall or one of these places, and the violinist Isaac Stern had shown up and was, this is when I think you were doing a sound check, and then he said, I'm coming to listen to your father this evening. And he came, and then he was so moved, he went to meet Vilayat Khan and Hidayat and said that, listen, why don't you consider doing some sort of like duet with me and we can experiment. And Vilayat Khan simply said no, because there's so much in this music that we don't really need to spread into other areas, and you're great at what you do and I'm great at what I do, and let's leave it at that and be good friends. And they were. And so my question to you is that given that, and as a kind of a somewhat lay listener, when I listen to your music, your Gharana's music, Khansa's music, your music, I just find that there's a kind of a modernity in it. It's kind of extraordinary because it's very classical. Even when you all are playing traditional classical music, there's a contemporary vibe. There's a kind of a rock star element in it, which I'm like, this is not a musicological description, but I really sense that. You know, it's like you feel like tapping your feet, you get excited.
Absolutely.
So why then do you feel the need to kind of experiment with Western musicians, and how would, you know, say Khan Sahib have addressed that?
Me?
Yeah, you personally. Since now we're talking about you.
Let's
Because
not talk about how he would have addressed it.
No, I know, because I read in an interview that he said that, you know, ye sab fusion nahi hai, confusion hai. Actually, a lot of these old-fashioned artists have said that because it sounds really good. But
no, it makes sense, you know what? Because back in the day, when in the 60s, when Indian music was exposed to the West, it was getting high and happy sort of a zone. People really didn't understand the music, but it was a fad. And from there to now, there's been a lot of development. I mean, we play concerts from across the globe, and honestly, there is an amazing audience everywhere in the world that understands the absolute subtleties of our music. So that has changed into what fusion music is. So back in the day, what fusion music was like, I want to hear the sitar in my song, you know. I mean, they played the sitar in the song, and you know, it was the sitar, you know, it wasn't sitar. So now it's changed. It's changed. People actually understand music. I'm teaching at American University in Washington, and I'm teaching performing. It's a very good performing arts school with jazz music, and I'm not teaching them Indian classical music, and I'm not teaching them about the Vedas and the chants and the ragas and stuff like that. I'm teaching them about improvisation from an Indian perspective. And what I'm learning back is how amazingly they sort of understand that, and they sort of come up with harmonies. So when we do jazz work with them, it's not just about playing a scale of a rag. And a lot of the jazz pieces, if you hear that are being done, are very high energy, rhythm oriented pieces, is because rhythm is an easier language to understand. It's something that we all have within us, and it's exciting. So people use that to camouflage a lack of understanding. I'm going to be a little blatant and say that it's to get a lack of understanding of that, and they use that. Now, the second level of understanding is harmonizing and keeping the essence of the music going. So today, you do hear a lot of fusion pieces. One of my favorite pieces is Hariji working with the French Philharmonic. If you hear that piece of music, it's just incredible. It's pretty old, it's about 15 years old, and it is integrated. It is not Rag Bihag or Puriya or anything like that, but it's music integrated. Yes, when we play classical pieces, we are very strict with our rags and timings and all of the above. But when we play semi-classical pieces in thumris and stuff like that, we do take liberties. And there's a lot of rags that were also very strict rags like Khamaj. But today, people don't play Khamaj as a formal rag. They play Khamaj as a thumri and they take liberties in it. So this is yet another genre of music that's coming out. I mean, from the chants to Drupa to however the evolution of music came about, this is a very natural progression. And even if you see our lives in general, I mean, music has to imitate our lives. If we're not eating the sattvic food that we had, I don't know, a few hundred years back, we're not dressing up the same, we're not living the same, our lives have changed, so music has to change and adapt accordingly. But at the same breath, what Puriya or John Puri or Bagheshi or whatever these rags were, what they were 200 years back, they will always be. They will always remain. So you have to, the difficult thing for musicians such as myself is keeping that discipline. That when we sit on a stage to perform classical music, how we can be true to the music, and if we sit on stage to do a fusion or a Sufi or whatever this thing, we need to understand the different genres and sort of be true to that.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we have time for about 3 or 4 questions, so if anybody has any.
If you could play one piece.
He's going to play.
Favorite of concerts, what would you say?
I think he's going to play right after, but we just wanted to have some questions, and I can depart and leave us with the music.
Can we ask for the difference in Laikari and Mindkari?
Sorry?
Laikari and Mindkari.
Meendkari?
Mind.
I mean, you can do lekari in anything. I mean, lekari is playing with le. Meend is playing with melody. So there has to be together. So साथ होना चाहिए. lekari and meendkari. But if it's a tihai that you're playing, if that's what you're calling lekari. Is just another technique of reaching out to a note.
Especially Hidayat Khan Sahab, they say his main.
See, don't ask me questions about what Hidayat Khan Sahab did because I'm not going to attempt demonstrating them.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Bhammer.
How are you? Just in the context of the sitar, the more I hear you speak, how is it that the sitar made it to the West and didn't make it to the East? The entire evening we've talked about America and we've talked about the West. Never heard of a Japanese or an Australian guy or like so. How come the progression of classical music, specifically the sitar, moved out west and not out to the east?
Can I attempt to answer that? I think these things happen really quite accidentally, and in this particular case, from whatever little research I've done, it was thanks to a man called Yehudi Menuhin who happened to love India and the sitar and invited Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan to come and perform in the Museum of Modern Art. It was the first ever Indian classical music performance in the West. Back in, I think, 1950 something. And that's when it sort of started moving forward. And then soon after that, in the 60s, the Beatles came into the picture, etc. So I think it was more a turn of historic events and different people responding at that time. It wasn't a specific sort of Western interest as opposed to an Eastern interest. And I also suspect that the East has such rich traditions of its own that it wasn't really looking for these new sounds as much as perhaps the West. I mean, possibly.
And just as a follow-up to that question, you know, in the subcontinent, we find a lot of sitar players emerging out of India. And if you go back to the history of the sitar and the fact that Hazrat Amir Khusro brought the sitar over to this part of the world, notwithstanding the fact that we already had the Rudra Veena here, you know, how come we're not finding, you know, accomplished sitar players coming out of Pakistan and Bangladesh? And, you know, why is it that India is, what's so special about India that all of our classical musicians, you know, and Hindustani classical...
You murdered for playing music, you know, which kind of happens in Pakistan periodically, so it's a little problematic.
Is that really the case, or...?
Well, I mean...
Yeah, I think, on a serious note, I mean, I think you need to have people that inspire you, right? If cricket is another thing that is synonymous to our part of the world. I mean, so when there's a star cricketer, he influences a whole bunch of other people. And then there has to be an environment that sort of doesn't kill you, as Namita said. So, yeah, I mean, and so India has had so many amazing musicians and sitar players that have inspired a generation of musicians, which is not, unfortunately, not the case in Pakistan for sitar players, but there's Qawwali, I mean, Nusrat Saab, Mehndi Saab, Ghulam Ali Saab. So it's just who is born where, I mean, and that sort of cultivates a whole generation of musicians, I would say.
We have time for one more, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, sorry if this is I apologize in advance, it's a bit of a personal question, but...
I'm single.
Actually about your father. Though I'm very happy to know that.
Me too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Just following up on how Yehudi Menuhin, you know, invited Ravi Shankar. And Ravi Shankar, Woodstock and all became this huge global hit, and with the Beatles and so on. And where I grew up in Chennai, in a very musical family, and we'd always heard that your father, Vilayat Khan, was kind of miffed that Ravi Shankar, who was the lesser, you know, musician or lesser sitar player, more flamboyant personality, got this worldwide fame, whereas he was by far the better sitar player, did not achieve the same fame. Is there any truth to that kind of musicological gossip, or not?
I'm sure there is some, you know, the rumors don't come out of nowhere. But Abba was very flamboyant for people who knew him. And thank God for Panditji, because really we're making a career out of doing this, and a huge credit goes to Panditji for that. Across the globe is what I mean. We grew up, Panditji was close to the family. I mean, so we grew up with all of these great maestros as kakas and chachas and things. So obviously what the gossip was really, really exaggerated, but personally there was a lot of affection, there was a lot of respect, and music is a very personal thing. So as much as obviously I'm a huge fan of my father's, I mean, and to me he's the greatest musician, but I totally understand somebody who says Ravi Shankar ji is the greatest sitar player. I mean, because music has to connect with you on a very, very personal note, and why that happens is a mystery. I mean, if we figured that out, and if you figured that out, please tell me, because I'd have a whole bunch of hits, you know, after that. But it's a very personal thing, so there is no formula for that. Why one person relates to one person's music and not to another person? Why somebody thinks that my father is the greatest thing that happened to music and another person doesn't? You cannot argue with that. You just cannot, because it's a personal, creative connection.
And also Ravi Shankar was a much more collaborative artist out of choice. Vilayat Khan Sahib, I think, chose not to be. And so when you're collaborating with so many different kinds of musicians all over the world, you're going to spread your sort of popularity that much more. So it was also out of choice, wasn't it? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I remember having a conversation with my father. I was 20-something years old, and I was working for Time Warner in New York, and we were making jingles, and we were making really good chunk of change making jingles, and really good chunk of change, which I would never make again in my life, especially doing what I do. And my father sat me down and said, "Tu kya karna chahta hai?" Obvious answer to that is sitar bajaunga, You're not going to question that. So he genuinely said that everything that he did in his life was contradiction to being famous. He actually said the words. He said, "मेरी किस्मत में लिखा था नाम कमाना. अगर मैं जूते भी बनाता तो मेरा नाम हो जाता."
wow.
So he never did anything. I mean, in the peak of his career, imagine in the 60s getting up and going to Simla, where you can't even make a phone call. For him to get to anywhere in the world was a 7-hour, 6-hour drive away. I mean, imagine people calling him for a concert with telegram mein likhe, you can have to decipher it with a Morse code and stuff, So that was him. He was destined to be famous. As classical young musicians, one thing is very sort of important, I think, and I'm fortunate enough to sort of feel that I understand it a little bit, is because I've been brought up with the greatest of the greats. Is classical music is for a very niche audience. I don't expect to get photographed and autographed and when I'm walking down the street, and I have actually no desire of doing that. And I understand that, so I'm not trying to be a rock star or a famous musician, because this is a very field of very selective people, and I think my father was one of those lucky few people that fame was destined and he got famous. But he really never did anything appropriate or right in the direction of fame. But he did also, I mean, so it's a contradiction. It was a contradiction.
Now we're going to have Hidayat play.
Baba was known for playing teen tal. But he made a few compositions, and so this is one of these very rare compositions that he created in ek tal. And he dedicated all his compositions to his father. The lyrics of the compositions are very beautiful. Tumhare roop hum jaane pehchane. I will attempt to sing the composition because it's a vocal composition, but
ladies and gentlemen, think of this as the prelude. I mean, we know that the book is going to launch later this year. And so we're going to welcome Hidayat back, perhaps at the Royal Opera House, and have the latter part of this performance then. But Hidayat, Anutosh, Namita, thank you very much for a memorable evening. I'm sure we're all going to cherish this. We'd like to thank our partners, the NGMA, Mr. Kenneth, the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. Thank you for being a great audience. Sorry about the little mishap with the sound, but you know, we had the opportunity to hear Hidayat, and I think I can hear myself echoing right now. And thank you for being such an engaged audience. We have a very exciting lineup at Avid this week at the Sorry, I have to do my Avid plug. This week at JLF, we're presenting a couple of panels. We have the Mumbai Gallery Week at the Royal Opera House on the 1st of February. We're going to be doing, everyone here has a book in them, and we're going to be having a publishing workshop on how to get published with Chiki Sarkar of Juggernaut. We're going to be launching Chandrahas Chaudhary's book Clouds with Nasruddin Shah reading. There'll be music, art. We're going to teach people how to appreciate opera with an Opera 101 workshop on the 17th of February. And we also have an Art Deco workshop, which is on the 3rd of February. So hopefully there's more information outside. Hopefully we'll see you at some of the programs. And thank you for joining us. And don't remember to post the pictures you've taken today at Avid Learning, #Learning Never Stops. Thank you so much.